This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.
Avis Everhard had always lived a life of privilege. Sheltered from the harsh realities of the world, she had never known true hardship or struggle. But as she stepped into adulthood, a nagging sense of unease began to creep into her consciousness, like a persistent itch she couldn't quite scratch. The gilded cage of her upbringing suddenly felt confining, and she found herself questioning the societal norms she had always accepted without thought. On a crisp autumn morning, Avis made a decision that would change the course of her life. She decided to visit one of her father's factories, driven by a curiosity she couldn't explain. As she approached the looming brick building, the acrid smell of smoke and sweat assaulted her senses, making her eyes water and her nose wrinkle in distaste. The rhythmic clanging of machinery grew louder with each step, a discordant symphony that set her nerves on edge and made her heart race with anticipation. Stepping inside, Avis felt as though she'd entered another world entirely. The air was thick with dust and despair, making it difficult to breathe. She coughed, the sound lost in the cacophony of machines. Row upon row of workers toiled like automatons, their faces etched with exhaustion and resignation. The contrast between their squalid surroundings and her own plush lifestyle hit her like a physical blow, leaving her momentarily breathless. As she moved through the factory, her silk dress feeling suddenly garish and out of place, Avis's eyes were drawn to a young woman not much older than herself. The worker's hands were raw and calloused, moving with practiced efficiency as she operated a dangerous-looking machine. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Avis saw a flicker of something. Resentment, curiosity, before the woman's gaze dropped back to her work. Avis couldn't help but wonder what dreams this woman had been forced to abandon in the struggle for mere survival. That evening, still shaken by what she'd witnessed, Avis confronted her father over dinner. The crystal chandelier above them seemed to mock the squalor she'd seen earlier. "How can you allow such conditions in your factories?" she demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. Her hands shook as she gripped her fork, knuckles white with tension. Her father's response was as cold as the silver spoon he'd been born with. "It's simply the way of business, my dear," he said, not even looking up from his plate. "Those people should be grateful for the work we provide." His words, once a source of comfort and wisdom, now rang hollow in Avis's ears. She pushed away from the table, appetite gone, a fire of determination kindling in her chest. The scrape of her chair against the polished floor echoed in the suddenly silent dining room. In the days that followed, Avis threw herself into research with a fervor that surprised even herself. She devoured books on labor conditions and social inequality, each page fueling her growing sense of injustice. The words of philosophers and activists became her constant companions, challenging everything she thought she knew about the world. Her once tidy room became a maze of open books and scribbled notes, a physical manifestation of her mental upheaval. But books weren't enough. Avis knew she needed to see more, to hear the stories directly from those affected. She began visiting other factories, each one a new circle in the hell of industrial exploitation. In dingy break rooms and on street corners, she listened to workers' tales of hardship and struggle, her heart breaking a little more with each story. A weathered man with calloused hands told her of working 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week, just to keep a roof over his family's head. His eyes, once bright with dreams, now dulled by exhaustion, haunted her long after their conversation ended. A young mother, dark circles under her eyes, spoke of leaving her children alone while she worked, praying they'd be safe until her return. The woman's trembling hands as she described her daily fears made Avis's own privileged childhood seem like a distant fairy tale. With each story, the veil of ignorance that had shrouded Avis's life began to lift, like fog burning away in the harsh light of day. The world she had known, a world of garden parties and idle chatter, now seemed as insubstantial as a soap bubble, ready to pop at the slightest touch. In its place, a stark reality emerged, one where the comforts she took for granted were built on the backs of those struggling just to survive. The disparity between her life and theirs became impossible to ignore. Every silk dress in her closet, every delicate pastry on her plate, now carried the weight of unseen labor and suffering. Avis found herself lying awake at night, haunted by the faces of those she'd met, their stories echoing in her mind like a relentless drumbeat. As her awareness grew, so did her restlessness. The drawing rooms and tea parties that had once been her whole world now felt suffocating, like a beautifully decorated prison. Avis knew she could no longer be a passive observer of injustice. The fire that had been kindled in her chest now burned bright and fierce, demanding action. In that moment of clarity, Avis Everhard made a decision that would alter the course of her life. No longer content to be a mere spectator, she resolved to become an active force for change. The pampered daughter of privilege was gone, and in her place stood a woman ready to fight for a more just world, no matter the cost. As she looked out her window at the city below, the twinkling lights now seeming to mock the darkness she'd discovered, Avis felt a mix of trepidation and excitement. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges she could scarcely imagine. But for the first time in her life, she felt truly alive, driven by a purpose greater than herself. With trembling hands, she picked up a flyer she'd found earlier that day. It advertised a meeting, a gathering of like-minded individuals determined to fight for workers' rights. Avis took a deep breath, her heart pounding with nervous anticipation. She knew attending this meeting would be the point of no return, a step into a world her father would never approve of. As the sun set, casting long shadows across her room, Avis made her decision. She would go to the meeting. With one last glance at her reflection, a stranger staring back at her with fire in her eyes, she slipped out of the house, the flyer clutched tightly in her hand. The cool night air hit her face as she stepped onto the street, a world of possibility stretching out before her. Little did she know that in just a few short hours, she would find herself in a room buzzing with excitement, surrounded by people from all walks of life, their faces a mix of curiosity and hope. The journey of transformation had begun, and there was no turning back. The room buzzed with a palpable excitement as Avis found her seat. People from all walks of life filled the hall, their faces a mix of curiosity and hope. The air was thick with anticipation, a low murmur of voices rising and falling, like waves on a restless sea. Avis felt her heart quicken, her palms growing damp as she smoothed her skirt nervously. As the lights dimmed, a hush fell over the crowd, as if a blanket of silence had been draped over them. The collective intake of breath was almost audible as Ernest Everhard strode onto the stage. His presence was magnetic, drawing all eyes to him like moths to a flame. Avis felt a jolt of electricity run through her as their eyes met for a brief moment. He stood tall and proud, like a lion surveying his domain, ready to roar his truth to the world. "My friends," Ernest began, his voice rich and powerful, filling every corner of the hall. "We stand at a crossroads in history." His words washed over the audience like a tidal wave, sweeping away their preconceptions and leaving them raw and receptive. As Ernest delved into the contradictions of capitalism, Avis found herself leaning forward, hanging on every word. The world around her faded away, leaving only Ernest's voice in the vivid pictures he painted with his words. He spoke of a society divided, where the rich grew fat on the labor of the poor, their wealth a poison slowly killing the very system that birthed it. "Look around you," he challenged, his eyes blazing with an inner fire. "Do you not see the cracks in the foundation of our so-called prosperity?" Avis felt a shiver run down her spine, goosebumps rising on her arms. She had seen those cracks, had felt them growing beneath her feet like roots of a malevolent tree, but never had she heard them articulated so clearly, so forcefully. Ernest's critique of the oligarchy was like a surgeon's scalpel, precise and merciless. He exposed the hidden strings that puppeteered the economy, the smoke and mirrors that obscured the true nature of power. With each revelation, Avis felt scales falling from her eyes, her worldview shifting and realigning like tectonic plates. But it was when Ernest began to paint a picture of a different world that Avis truly felt her heart soar. His words sketched a society where workers stood tall, where wealth flowed like water to nourish all, not just a privileged few. It was a vision so beautiful, so tantalizing, that Avis could almost reach out and touch it, taste it on her tongue like the sweetest fruit. As Ernest's speech reached its crescendo, Avis realized she was on her feet, cheering with the rest of the crowd. The air crackled with energy, with possibility. For the first time in her life, Avis felt truly awake, as if she had been sleepwalking through life until this very moment. When the lecture ended, Avis found herself swept along in a tide of people, all eager to speak with Ernest. But she was determined, a fire lit within her that would not be extinguished. She pushed her way forward, questions burning on her tongue like embers. "Mr. Everhard," she called out, her voice surprisingly steady despite the hammering of her heart. "I have some questions about your ideas." Ernest turned, his eyes lighting up with interest. "And I'd be delighted to hear them, miss." "Avis," she replied, feeling a blush creep up her cheeks, warming her face like the first rays of dawn. What followed was a conversation that felt like a dance, a back and forth of ideas and challenges. Ernest met each of Avis's questions with patience and passion, his answers opening up new avenues of thought she had never considered. It was as if he was unlocking doors in her mind, revealing rooms she never knew existed. As the night wore on, Avis lost all track of time. The world outside the lecture hall faded away, leaving only this moment, this exchange of ideas that felt like sparks igniting a fire within her. She felt alive, more alive than she had ever felt before, her mind racing with new possibilities. It was only when she noticed the empty hall around them, chairs standing like silent sentinels, that Avis realized how late it had grown. But she felt no fatigue, only a burning desire to learn more, to understand more, to dive deeper into this ocean of knowledge Ernest had revealed to her. As they said their goodbyes, Avis knew with certainty that this night had changed her. The passion for socialist ideals that had been kindled by Ernest's words now burned bright within her, a flame that would not be easily extinguished. She left the hall with a spring in her step, her mind racing with new possibilities, eager to dive deeper into this movement that promised to reshape the world. But as she stepped out into the cool night air, a sudden thought struck her like a bolt of lightning. What would her family think of her newfound passion? How would this change her relationships, her place in society? As the question swirled in her mind, Avis realized that her journey was only just beginning, and the path ahead was as thrilling as it was uncertain. Ernest's powerful lecture had left an indelible mark on Avis. In the weeks that followed, she found herself irresistibly drawn into the world of socialist thought. The crisp autumn air seemed to carry with it a promise of change as Avis devoured socialist literature, her mind expanding with each turn of the page. The once familiar streets of her privileged neighborhood now felt alien, as if she were seeing them through new eyes. As golden leaves crunched underfoot, Avis and Ernest began meeting regularly at a small cafe near the university. The warm aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the musty scent of old books, creating an intoxicating atmosphere of intellect and possibility. Their conversations flowed like a river, winding through topics from Marx's theories to the nitty-gritty of worker organization. Ernest's eyes sparkled with passion as he spoke, his hands painting pictures in the air. Avis found herself captivated not just by his words, but by the fire that burned within him. Their intellectual connection sparked something deeper. Stolen glances across the table turned into lingering touches. Avis's heart raced at the brush of Ernest's fingers against hers, the world around them fading to a soft blur. In those moments, it felt as if they were the only two people in existence, united by a shared dream of a better tomorrow. Ernest introduced Avis to a vibrant cast of characters from the socialist movement. There was Joe, his voice as rough as sandpaper, but with a heart of pure gold. Sarah, a factory worker whose fiery speeches could ignite a crowd's passion in seconds. And the kindly Professor Thompson, who had sacrificed everything for his beliefs. Each encounter opened Avis's eyes wider to the struggles of the working class, strengthening her resolve to fight for change. As winter's icy fingers gripped the city, Avis ventured into unfamiliar territory. She found herself on street corners, breath visible in the frigid air, handing out pamphlets and speaking about workers' rights. Her voice trembled at first, but grew stronger with each interaction. The gratitude in the eyes of those who listened gave her courage, even as others hurled insults or turned away in disgust. At home, the chill wasn't just from the weather. Avis's father, his face a mask of confusion and disappointment, confronted her one evening. "I don't understand what's gotten into you," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "We've given you everything, and this is how you repay us?" The words cut deep, but Avis stood her ground, feeling the gulf between them widening with each passing moment. Despite the growing tension at home, Avis and Ernest's relationship blossomed. They found solace in each other's arms, their love intertwined with their shared passion for justice. On a crisp spring morning, as delicate cherry blossoms danced on the breeze, Ernest took Avis's hand. His voice trembled slightly as he asked her to be his wife. Tears of joy welled in her eyes as she said yes, knowing they were committing not just to each other, but to a lifelong struggle for equality. Their wedding was a simple affair in a small park where they had often walked. A handful of comrades gathered around them, faces beaming with hope and happiness. As Avis and Ernest exchanged vows, their words seemed to carry the weight of their shared dreams. The celebration that followed was modest but filled with laughter, song, and passionate discussions about the future they would build together. As newlyweds, Avis and Ernest threw themselves fully into their work. Long nights were spent hunched over a rickety table in their tiny apartment, drafting speeches and planning rallies. By day, they were out in the streets, voices hoarse from shouting slogans, feet aching from marching. But no matter how exhausted they were, they always found the energy to hold each other close at night, drawing strength from their love and shared commitment. Together, they faced the daunting power of the oligarchy, their determination growing stronger with each challenge. Avis and Ernest knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but as they looked into each other's eyes, they saw a reflection of the world they were fighting to create, a world of justice, equality, and hope for all. As summer approached, whispers began to spread through their network of comrades. Ernest's name was on everyone's lips, spoken with a mixture of awe and excitement. His speeches were drawing larger crowds, his words resonating with people from all walks of life. Avis watched with pride as her husband's influence grew, but a nagging worry gnawed at the back of her mind. How would those in power react to this rising star of socialism? As Ernest prepared for his biggest rally yet, Avis couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. Ernest's reputation as a formidable socialist leader continued to soar. His influence expanded rapidly, capturing the attention of both supporters and opponents alike. The air hummed with anticipation wherever he went, a palpable energy that seemed to crackle around him like static electricity. As Ernest stepped into the opulent halls of exclusive clubs and private gatherings, the atmosphere shifted. Plush carpets muffled his footsteps, but his presence was impossible to ignore. Crystal chandeliers cast a soft glow on polished mahogany tables, where men in tailored suits sat nursing tumblers of amber liquid. The scent of cigar smoke hung heavy in the air, mingling with the subtle notes of expensive cologne. "Gentlemen," Ernest's voice cut through the hushed conversations, a hint of irony in his tone. "Let us speak plainly about the system that has made you rich and others poor." The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on the man who dared to challenge their world order. In one particularly memorable debate, Ernest faced off against a group of prominent industrialists and financiers. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Beads of sweat formed on the brow of a steel magnate as Ernest systematically dismantled their arguments. It was like watching a master fencer, each thrust of logic parried and countered with precision. "You speak of free markets," Ernest challenged, his words sharp and precise. "But tell me, how free is a market when you control the very air we breathe?" He wielded their own data like a weapon, each statistic a blow against their carefully constructed facade. Avis, ever present at Ernest's side, watched with a mixture of pride and concern. Her pen flew across the pages of her notebook, capturing every word, every reaction. She noted the nervous twitch of a banker's fingers, the tightening of jaws as Ernest's words hit home. These were the details that told the true story of power confronted. As Ernest's influence grew, so did the pushback. Threats began to trickle in, at first veiled in polite language, then becoming more overt. One day a note arrived that made Avis's blood run cold. "It would be a shame if something were to happen to such a talented speaker," it read, the implied menace clear as day. But Ernest remained undeterred. If anything, the threats only fueled his determination. He threw himself into his work with renewed vigor, his articles becoming more incisive, his speeches more impassioned. Workers hung on his every word, finding in him a voice for their long, suppressed frustrations. The ruling class, feeling the ground shift beneath their feet, resorted to more desperate measures. They wielded their control over the media like a cudgel, flooding newspapers and radio waves with propaganda. Ernest's name was dragged through the mud, his character assassinated in print. "Look at how they fear us," Ernest said to Avis one evening, his voice low and intense. They sat in their small apartment, the warm glow of a lamp casting long shadows on the wall. "Their lies are the death throes of a dying system." His eyes softened then, the fire in them banking to a warm glow as he looked at her. "We're making a difference, my love. Can you feel it?" And Avis could. Despite the challenges, despite the danger, she felt the tide of history turning. In the faces of the workers who flocked to hear Ernest speak, in the whispered conversations of intellectuals in coffee shops, she saw hope blooming like flowers after a long winter. As the threats and accusations continued to mount, Ernest and Avis drew strength from each other and from the growing movement around them. They were no longer just two people fighting against an insurmountable system. They were the vanguard of a revolution, their love for each other and for justice intertwined like roots of a mighty tree. The ruling class might control the media, might have wealth and power on their side, but Ernest and Avis had something far more potent: the truth. And as they continued their fight, undeterred by the storm raging around them, they knew that truth would ultimately prevail. But as night fell and the city lights flickered to life outside their window, a sense of unease settled over them. The air felt heavy, charged with an ominous energy. Ernest's hand tightened around Avis's as they both sensed it. Something was changing, shifting beneath the surface of society. Little did they know, the true test of their resolve was yet to come, as the iron heel prepared to tighten its grip on their world in ways they could never have imagined. The iron heel's grip on society tightened with each passing day. Its ruthlessness left Avis and Ernest breathless, struggling to comprehend the rapid changes engulfing their world. The air hung heavy with tension, thick as molasses and just as suffocating. Avis stood at the window, her fingers pressed against the cool glass, watching as the once bustling streets grew eerily quiet. The silence was punctuated only by the occasional distant shout or the ominous rumble of military vehicles. Labor unions, once proud bastions of workers' rights, crumbled like sandcastles before a rising tide. Union leaders vanished in the dead of night, their families left to wonder and worry. When these men and women resurfaced, it was in courtrooms that felt more like theaters of the absurd. Their faces were gaunt, eyes sunken and haunted, as they faced charges so trumped up they would have been laughable if the consequences weren't so dire. The right to strike, long considered sacred, was snuffed out like a candle in a storm. Workers who dared to raise their voices found themselves facing not just dismissal, but brutal suppression. Avis's stomach churned as she recalled the sickening thud of batons against flesh, the acrid sting of tear gas burning her eyes and throat. "Ernest," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. "What's happening to our world?" Her husband's usually strong voice trembled as he described the iron heel's stranglehold on the media. "It's like they're poisoning the very air we breathe," he said, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles turned white. "Every newspaper, every radio broadcast, it's all lies and propaganda now." As civil liberties withered like neglected plants, a suffocating police state bloomed in their place. Cameras appeared on every street corner, their unblinking eyes a constant reminder of the watchful gaze of the iron heel. Avis felt exposed, vulnerable, as if those lenses could peer into her very soul. The justice system, once a beacon of hope for the oppressed, became a twisted parody of itself. Judges, their robes as dark as storm clouds, openly favored the oligarchy. The sharp crack of their gavels echoed through courtrooms like gunshots, each blow shattering the dreams and hopes of the working class. Economic policies rolled out like waves of destruction, each one leaving more devastation in its wake. Avis's heart ached as she saw families torn apart, their dreams crushed beneath the weight of poverty and hopelessness. Children with hollow cheeks and dull eyes haunted her dreams, their silent accusations more damning than any words could be. But even in the darkest night, stars can still shine. Avis and Ernest refused to let the flame of resistance flicker out. They became beacons of hope in a world growing darker by the day. In hidden basements and abandoned warehouses, they organized secret meetings, their whispered words of encouragement spreading like wildfire among the oppressed. The click-clack of typewriter keys became a rhythm of rebellion. Avis's fingers flew across the keys, each word a small act of defiance against the crushing weight of oppression. Ernest's powerful rhetoric, once shouted from podiums, now found its way onto carefully folded pamphlets, passed from hand to hand like precious contraband. Their home became a sanctuary, a haven in a world gone mad. Families with haunted eyes and empty stomachs found solace and support within its walls. The air was thick with the scent of strong coffee and desperation, but also with something else. Hope, fragile but persistent. As conditions worsened, their resolve only grew stronger. They were no longer just activists. They had become the keepers of hope, the guardians of a dream that refused to die. In the face of overwhelming odds, Avis and Ernest stood firm, their love for each other and for the cause they believed in burning brighter than ever. With each act of kindness, each word of encouragement, and each small victory against the iron heel, they kept the spirit of resistance alive. It was a flame that flickered and wavered, but refused to be extinguished, a testament to the indomitable human spirit in the face of tyranny. As the sun set on another day of struggle, Avis and Ernest clung to each other, drawing strength from their shared commitment. The future loomed dark and uncertain, but a spark of possibility flickered on the horizon. Ernest's eyes gleamed with a fierce determination as he whispered, "We're not beaten yet. Tomorrow we take the fight to them, in their own arena." Avis's heart raced. What could he mean? As sleep finally claimed her, she dreamed of Ernest standing tall, his voice ringing out in defiance against the very heart of the Iron Heel's power. Ernest's unwavering determination led him to a remarkable victory. Against all odds, he managed to win election to Congress on a socialist platform that resonated deeply with the masses. The weight of responsibility settled on Ernest's shoulders, like a heavy cloak as he climbed the steps of the Capitol building. The marble halls echoed with his footsteps, each one a reminder of the monumental task ahead. He breathed in the musty air, tinged with the scent of old books and polished wood, steeling himself for the battles to come. On the day of his first speech, the chamber buzzed with anticipation. Ernest stood at the podium, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked out at the sea of faces, some curious, others hostile. Taking a deep breath, he began. His voice, clear and strong, cut through the air like a knife. "We cannot stand idly by while our fellow citizens suffer under the boot of oppression." The words tumbled out, each one carefully chosen, each one a blow against the edifice of injustice. As he spoke, he could feel the energy in the room shift, could see the spark of hope ignite in the eyes of some listeners. But even as his words found their mark, Ernest could feel the icy stares of the pro-oligarchy politicians. Their glares bored into him, promising retribution. He pushed on, his passion a shield against their hatred. In the weeks that followed, Ernest threw himself into his work with a fervor that left him exhausted but exhilarated. He crafted bills aimed at protecting workers' rights, his pen scratching across paper late into the night. Each piece of legislation was a carefully constructed weapon in his arsenal against inequality. Yet for every step forward, Ernest faced a wall of obstruction. The pro-oligarchy majority in Congress formed a barrier as unyielding as steel. They buried his bills in committees, tangled them in red tape, anything to keep them from seeing the light of day. It was like trying to break through a fortress with his bare hands, but Ernest's determination never wavered. Outside the marble walls of Congress, Ernest continued his grassroots organizing. He traveled from city to city, his voice growing hoarse from countless speeches. In dingy union halls that smelled of sweat and hope, in sun-baked town squares where the air shimmered with heat, he rallied support for the socialist cause. His words were a lifeline to those drowning in despair, and the crowd swelled like a rising tide. But as Ernest's influence grew, So did the Iron Heel's desperation to silence him. In shadowy boardrooms that reeked of cigar smoke and expensive cologne, they plotted his downfall. Like a spider weaving its web, they began to fabricate evidence, linking Ernest to a non-existent terrorist plot. The day of Ernest's arrest came like a thunderbolt from a clear sky. The harsh clank of handcuffs echoed in his ears as he was led away. His eyes scanned the shocked crowd, finally locking with Avis's. In that moment, a silent vow passed between them. This fight was far from over. Avis felt her heart shatter, but her spirit remained unbroken. She threw herself into the fight to prove Ernest's innocence, with a ferocity that surprised even her. She became a whirlwind of activity, her days a blur of meetings with journalists and lawyers. Every lead was pursued, every piece of evidence scrutinized. It was like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. But Avis refused to give up. As the days turned into weeks, Avis found herself stepping into a larger role within the socialist movement. The fire of Ernest's passion now burned within her, driving her to speak at rallies and coordinate activities. Her voice, once hesitant, now rang out strong and clear, keeping the momentum of their cause alive in Ernest's absence. In the quiet moments between her frenetic activities, Avis would often pause, her thoughts turning to Ernest in his prison cell. She imagined him, unbowed and unbroken, his spirit as indomitable as ever. And in those moments, she would renew her vow to fight on, to expose the truth, and to bring down the iron heel that sought to crush them all. As night fell over the city, an eerie calm settled over the streets. But beneath the surface, tensions simmered like a pot about to boil over. Avis stood at her window, watching the shadows lengthen, when suddenly a distant roar reached her ears. Her heart raced as she realized what was happening. The calm had been shattered, and the storm was about to break. The streets of Chicago erupted in chaos. Workers, pushed to their breaking point, rose up against their oppressors. Years of brutal treatment had finally ignited a spark, and now the city was ablaze with revolution. The air crackled with electricity, thick with the acrid smell of smoke and sweat. Factory workers poured onto the streets in waves, their faces etched with determination and fury. Shouts and chants echoed off brick walls as the crowd surged forward like a tidal wave, overwhelming police barricades with sheer numbers and raw desperation. Avis felt her heart pounding as she made her way through the transformed city. The Chicago she knew had vanished, replaced by a metropolis pulsing with newfound energy. Every street corner buzzed with passionate debate. Every face she passed was alight with purpose. She could almost taste the possibility in the air, sweet and intoxicating. Workers' councils sprang up overnight, their makeshift meeting halls humming with activity. Avis found herself swept up in the fervor, attending meetings that stretched late into the night. She helped organize food distribution, her hands blistered but her spirit soaring. In between, she wrote feverishly, trying to capture the birth pangs of this new world struggling to emerge. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed as if they were on the cusp of something truly revolutionary. Factories hummed with renewed purpose, no longer serving the profits of the few, but the needs of the many. People spoke of equality and justice not as distant dreams, but as tangible realities within their grasp. But the dream was not to last. The first sign of trouble came as a low rumble, felt more than heard. Avis was in the middle of a council meeting when the floor began to tremble beneath her feet. The voices around her faltered, then fell silent as the rumble grew to a roar. Troops poured into the city, their boots striking the cobblestones like a funeral dirge. The sky darkened as if night had fallen early, choked with the smoke of artillery fire. A sickly sweet smell crept through the streets, gas seeping like a malevolent fog through every crack and crevice. Panic erupted. People ran in all directions, their earlier unity shattered by fear. Avis found herself caught in the crush, struggling to breathe as the gas burned her lungs. Through watering eyes, she saw barricades hastily thrown up, heard the crack of gunfire and the screams of the wounded. The workers fought back with everything they had, improvised weapons, overturned cars, and an indomitable spirit that refused to be crushed. But it was like trying to hold back the tide with bare hands. Street by street, block by block, the iron heel tightened its grip. Avis's notebook became stained with tears and ash as she recorded the fall of the commune. Each word was a struggle, her hands shaking as explosions rocked the city. She wrote of courage in the face of overwhelming odds, of dreams snuffed out too soon, of the cruel efficiency with which hope was crushed. In the end, it was over almost as quickly as it had begun. An eerie quiet settled over Chicago, the silence of defeat and despair. What followed was a nightmare of retribution. Mass executions turned street corners into killing fields. Anyone suspected of involvement in the uprising was dragged from their homes, their fates sealed before dawn. Avis, her heart heavy with grief and her mind reeling from what she had witnessed, barely managed to slip away from the city. She carried with her not just her harrowing accounts, but the weight of shattered dreams and the bitter taste of what might have been. As she looked back at the smoldering ruins of Chicago, Avis knew that the failure of the commune would have far-reaching consequences. The Iron Heel, emboldened by its victory, would use this as an excuse to tighten its grip even further. The dream of freedom had been pushed back into the shadows, and the long night of oppression seemed darker than ever before. Yet even as despair threatened to overwhelm her, Avis felt a flicker of something else, a memory of the passion she had witnessed, the unity she had felt. It was a tiny spark, but it refused to be extinguished. As she turned away from the city, a distant sound caught her attention. It was faint at first, barely audible over the wind, but it grew stronger with each passing moment, the sound of crumbling stone. Avis's heart leapt into her throat as she realized what it meant. Somewhere, somehow, the fight wasn't over. The prison walls were falling. The prison walls crumbled, their once impenetrable facade now breached. Ernest, his heart racing with newfound freedom, tasted the sweet air of liberty once more. The night enveloped him like a cloak as he ran through empty streets, his footsteps a staccato rhythm against the silence. Cool air stung his face, each breath a reminder of the precious gift he'd reclaimed. His mind raced with thoughts of Avis, his beloved, waiting for him in a secret location. The image of her face, etched in his memory, pulled him forward through the darkness. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat, every rustle of leaves a possible pursuer. They reunited in a dimly lit room, the air thick with dust and anticipation. Their embrace was fierce, desperate, a tangle of limbs and emotions too long suppressed. Tears mingled as they held each other, savoring a moment of joy in their tumultuous world. Ernest breathed in Avis's scent, a mix of ink and lavender that grounded him in reality. "We can't fight them openly anymore," Ernest whispered, his voice hoarse from disuse. The words felt heavy on his tongue, laden with the weight of their new reality. Avis nodded, her eyes gleaming with determination. "Then we'll become ghosts, haunting their every step." Her voice was soft but steely, a perfect reflection of her indomitable spirit. They slipped into new identities like actors donning costumes, leaving their old selves behind. Ernest became John Smith, a mild-mannered factory worker with calloused hands and a forgettable face. Avis transformed into Mary Brown, a quiet librarian whose glasses hid sharp, observant eyes. They moved like leaves in the wind, never staying in one place long enough to leave a trace. Their life became a web of secrets and whispers. Safe houses sprouted across the country, each a tiny island of resistance in a sea of oppression. They developed a language of codes and signals, their words dancing between the lines of innocent letters and casual conversations. Every interaction was a delicate dance, a balance between caution and the need to spread their message. Avis took up her pen, determined to chronicle their struggle. Her fingers flew across the pages, weaving their story into a tapestry of hope and defiance. She wrote in a cipher of her own devising, each word a puzzle piece and a greater truth. The manuscripts were her children, hidden away in nooks and crannies, waiting for the day they could speak freely. The scratch of pen on paper became a comforting lullaby in their world of constant vigilance. Ernest, meanwhile, became a master of subterfuge. He moved through the shadows, gathering intel and recruiting allies. His words were seeds planted in the minds of the discontented, waiting to bloom into revolution. He learned to read people in an instant, to spot the flicker of doubt or the spark of rebellion in their eyes. Together, they built a network of cells, each operating independently yet united in purpose. It was like nurturing a garden in the dark, tending to fragile shoots of resistance with patience and care. Every new recruit was both a victory and a risk, a potential ally or a possible betrayal. "We're not just fighting the Iron Heel," Ernest would say during clandestine meetings, his voice low but passionate. "We're fighting for the soul of humanity." The words would hang in the air, heavy with the weight of their mission. Their days were filled with constant vigilance. Every stranger was a potential threat, every open space a possible trap. They lived on a knife's edge where a single misstep could spell disaster. The tension was a constant companion, as familiar as their own heartbeats. But in the quiet moments, when the world slept and they could simply be Ernest and Avis again, they found strength in each other. Their love was a beacon in the darkness, a reminder of what they were fighting for. They would lie together, fingers intertwined, whispering dreams of a future free from oppression. "Do you ever regret this life?" Avis asked one night, her head resting on Ernest's chest. The question hung in the air, fragile as a soap bubble. He stroked her hair, his voice soft but firm. "Never. Not when I'm with you. Not when we're making a difference." The words were a balm, soothing the doubts that sometimes crept in during the darkest hours. They celebrated small victories like precious gems. A successful sabotage operation, a new recruit brought into the fold, a piece of crucial intelligence obtained. Each was a step towards their ultimate goal. These moments of triumph were fuel for their spirits, keeping the flame of hope alive. As months turned into years, their underground movement grew stronger. The Iron Heel's grip, once seemingly unbreakable, began to show cracks. Ernest and Avis worked tirelessly, their efforts slowly chipping away at the oligarchy's power. It was like watching a mountain erode, slow but inexorable. Education became their most powerful weapon. In hidden classrooms and hushed study groups, they nurtured minds, teaching socialist theory and revolutionary tactics. Knowledge spread like wildfire, igniting hearts and minds across the nation. Each new convert was a small revolution in itself. Through it all, the danger never lessened. Each day brought new challenges, new risks. But Ernest and Avis faced them together, their shared commitment to the cause an unbreakable bond. They drew strength from each other, their love a fortress against the storm of oppression that raged around them. In the depths of night, as they planned their next move, Ernest would often pause and look at Avis, marveling at her strength and dedication. Her face, illuminated by candlelight, was a map of determination and hope. And in those moments, despite the hardships and sacrifices, he knew that their fight was worth every struggle. As dawn broke on another day of resistance, Ernest and Avis felt a shift in the air. Something was changing, a tension building like electricity before a storm. Whispers reached them from their network, murmurs of discontent growing louder, of people ready to take a stand. They exchanged a look, hope and fear mingling in their eyes. Could it be time? Were they finally ready to emerge from the shadows and confront the Iron Heel head-on? The answer came with a coded message, delivered by a breathless courier. As Ernest deciphered the text, his hands trembled. He looked up at Avis, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's happening. The First Revolt. It begins now." The revolutionaries had spent years meticulously planning and preparing for this moment. Now at last, the time had come to launch the First Revolt against the Iron Heel. As dawn broke, the air crackled with electricity, heavy with the weight of impending change. The streets, usually bustling with the mundane rhythm of daily life, now held their breath in anticipation. In major cities across the country, workers emerged from the shadows like wraiths, their faces etched with a mix of determination and fear. They moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine, their footsteps echoing through empty alleyways as they converged on key infrastructure and government buildings. The first rays of sunlight glinted off makeshift weapons and homemade flags, transforming ordinary citizens into an army of the oppressed. The air filled with a cacophony of sounds, the metallic clang of gates being forced open, the shattering of windows and the rising chorus of voices shouting slogans of freedom and defiance. At the heart of this whirlwind stood Ernest and Avis, their eyes bright with a volatile mixture of hope and terror. They huddled over crackling radios in a dimly lit basement, the flickering light casting long shadows on the wall. Their fingers flew over dials and switches, coordinating communications between rebel groups scattered across the nation. The static-filled voices coming through the speakers painted a picture of a country in upheaval. "Sector 7 secured," crackled one voice. "Heavy resistance in the financial district," reported another. "We need backup at the power plant." A third voice pleaded urgently. Ernest and Avis worked tirelessly, their voices growing hoarse from hours of relaying messages. The weight of responsibility pressed down on them like a physical force. They knew that every word they spoke, every decision they made, could mean the difference between victory and defeat, life and death. For a breathless moment, as reports of successes poured in from across the country, it seemed as if their wildest dreams were within reach. The Iron Heel, caught off guard by the scale and organization of the rebellion, stumbled. Workers raised red flags atop government buildings, their cheers rising like a tide of hope. Ernest and Avis exchanged a look of cautious optimism, their hands clasping tightly, daring to believe that their years of sacrifice might finally bear fruit. But the euphoria was short-lived. Like a slumbering giant awakening, the oligarchy began to stir. The distant rumble of tanks and the ominous whir of helicopters filled the air as the Iron Heel mobilized its vast military resources. Troops poured in from unaffected areas, their boots pounding a rhythm of impending doom on the pavement. The revolutionaries fought with the fierce desperation of those who have nothing left to lose. Streets became battlegrounds, the air thick with acrid smoke and the metallic tang of blood. The crack of gunfire and the screams of the wounded created a hellish symphony. Ernest and Avis raced from one hotspot to another, their hearts pounding as they narrowly escaped capture, time and again. They watched in horror as comrades fell, their bodies littering the streets they had hoped to liberate. The smell of gunpowder and burning rubber clung to their clothes, a constant reminder of the chaos surrounding them. City after city fell, the revolt crushed with a brutal efficiency that left them reeling. The Iron Heel's forces moved like a relentless tide, washing away the hard-won gains of the revolutionaries. Ernest and Avis worked frantically, their voices cracking as they coordinated escape routes and safe houses for as many of their comrades as they could save. As night fell, the weight of defeat settled over them like a suffocating blanket. The cities that had rung with revolutionary fervor now echoed with the sounds of mass arrests and the chilling crack of execution squads. The Iron Heel, enraged by the audacity of the revolt, implemented even more draconian measures. The air itself seemed to grow heavier, laden with fear and despair. Ernest and Avis huddled in a dimly lit safe house, their faces gaunt with exhaustion and grief. The flickering candlelight cast deep shadows under their eyes, highlighting the toll of the day's events. They knew their identities were now known to the authorities, their faces plastered on wanted posters across the nation. With heavy hearts, they prepared to flee, gathering what little they could carry. As they slipped out into the night, the city around them felt like a graveyard of broken dreams. The streets were eerily quiet, broken only by the occasional distant scream or the rumble of military vehicles. They left behind the bodies of fallen comrades and the shattered hopes of a better world. The burden of defeat weighed heavily on their shoulders, each step a reminder of how much harder their struggle had become. Yet even in this darkest hour, a tiny spark of defiance still burned within them. They carried with them not just the heavy burden of defeat, but also the unquenchable flame of revolution. As they disappeared into the shadows, Ernest and Avis silently vowed that this was not the end, but merely a setback in their long fight for freedom. The cool night air carried the scent of smoke and despair as they made their way to the outskirts of the city. Just as they thought they had escaped, the sudden beam of a searchlight cut through the darkness, illuminating their path. The distant sound of barking dogs and shouting voices grew louder. Ernest and Avis exchanged a panicked look, their hearts racing. They had to make a choice, and fast. The countryside beckoned, promising safety, but at what cost? As they stood at the crossroads of their fate, the question hung in the air. Could they outrun the Iron Heel's intensifying manhunt, or would their journey end before it truly began? The failed revolt left Ernest and Avis with no choice but to flee to the countryside. They adopted new disguises and false identities, desperate to evade the Iron Heel's intensified manhunt. The couple's hearts pounded in their chests as they approached the small farming community that would become their new home. Ernest's once soft hands, now calloused from manual labor, gripped the steering wheel tightly. Beside him, Avis clutched a worn leather satchel containing their forged papers, her bright eyes dulled by fear and exhaustion. As they stepped onto the dusty main street, a symphony of rural life assaulted their senses. The pungent scent of fresh hay and manure mingled with the earthy aroma of freshly tilled soil. Chickens clucked and pecked at the ground, while a distant tractor rumbled in the fields. Weather-beaten faces turned to study the newcomers, their curious glances a stark reminder of the delicate balance Ernest and Avis must maintain. "Remember," Ernest whispered, his lips barely moving. Every word, every gesture could mean the difference between safety and capture. Avis nodded imperceptibly, plastering on a warm smile as they approached the general store. The bell above the door jangled, announcing their arrival. Days bled into weeks as Ernest threw himself into his work as a farmhand. His muscles screamed in protest as he toiled under the relentless sun, but he welcomed the pain. It was a small price to pay for their safety. In the fields, he listened carefully to the grumbles and hopes of his fellow workers, filing away information that could fuel their cause. Avis, meanwhile, found unexpected solace in her role as the village schoolteacher. The schoolhouse became her sanctuary, filled with the eager faces of children untouched by the harsh realities beyond their small world. Her natural warmth won over both students and parents alike, creating a protective cocoon of goodwill around them. But beneath their carefully crafted personas, a fire still burned. Late at night, when the village slept and only the chirping of crickets broke the silence, they would descend into their barn. The musty scent of hay gave way to the sharp tang of ink as they fired up their clandestine printing press. The rhythmic clank of machinery mixed with hushed whispers as they produced pamphlets, each word a seed of revolution planted in fertile minds. Their modest farmhouse became a beacon of hope in a dark landscape. A soft knock at midnight might herald the arrival of a haggard comrade, seeking refuge on their journey to freedom. Ernest and Avis would usher them in, offering a warm bowl of soup and a safe place to rest, before guiding them through hidden paths in the moonlit countryside. The constant fear of discovery hung over them like a storm cloud, ready to burst at any moment. A strange car in town or an unfamiliar face at the market would send their hearts racing. They developed a silent language of glances and gestures, able to communicate danger without a word. One sweltering afternoon, as Ernest worked the fields, sweat dripping from his brow, he spotted a black automobile kicking up dust on the horizon. His blood ran cold as he recognized the telltale signs of Iron Heel agents. With practiced nonchalance, he made his way to the schoolhouse, where Avis was just dismissing her class. A single look conveyed everything. They slipped away, using the children's chatter as cover, and activated their emergency plan. Trusted neighbors, won over by months of kindness and subtle persuasion, provided distractions and false leads. The agents left empty-handed, but the close call left Ernest and Avis shaken to their core. That night, as they huddled in their small kitchen, the weight of their double lives pressed down upon them like a physical force. Avis buried her face in Ernest's shoulder, her body trembling with suppressed sobs. Ernest stroked her hair, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. The life they had built here, though a necessary facade, had become dear to them both. "We can't give up," Ernest whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Every day we stay free, every mind we open, is a victory against tyranny." Avis nodded, drawing strength from his words and the warmth of his embrace. They knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new risks. But as they held each other in the flickering lamplight, they found renewed determination. Their fight was far from over, and the seeds of revolution they had planted would one day bloom into a forest of change. As the first light of dawn crept through the window, Ernest and Avis exchanged a look of grim determination. They had no way of knowing how long they could maintain this precarious existence or what sacrifices lay ahead. The weight of time pressed down upon them, each passing day both a victory and a reminder of how much work remained to be done. As they prepared to face another day in their carefully constructed lives, a single thought echoed in their minds. How long could they keep up this charade before the relentless march of time and the ever-watchful eye of the Iron Heel caught up with them? The years slipped by like sand through an hourglass. Ernest and Avis dedicated themselves tirelessly to rebuilding the resistance movement, their commitment unwavering in the face of oppression. Their efforts took them across the country, a journey fraught with danger and secrecy. Every step, every whispered conversation, every clandestine meeting was a calculated risk in their fight against the Iron Heel. The couple moved through the world like ghosts, their true identities hidden behind a parade of carefully crafted disguises. In bustling city streets, they were just another face in the crowd. In quiet rural towns, they blended in as unremarkable travelers. The constant need for vigilance wore on them, etching lines of worry on their faces that no amount of makeup could fully conceal. Ernest, once a fiery orator who could ignite the passions of thousands, now spoke in hushed tones to small groups huddled in dimly lit basements. His words, though quieter, still carried the weight of revolution. In these intimate gatherings, the air thick with tension and hope, he planted the seeds of resistance in fertile minds. Avis, her keen eyes always alert, scanned their surroundings with the practiced ease of a predator. Her senses were fine-tuned to the slightest hint of danger. A lingering glance, a sudden hush, the crackle of a radio. She had become the invisible thread that held their fragile network together, her nimble mind crafting a language of whispers and silence that allowed information to flow beneath the notice of their oppressors. In rare moments of solitude, Avis would pore over her notes, her pen scratching softly against paper as she compiled the stories of countless revolutionaries. The weight of these tales, each one a testament to courage and sacrifice, pressed down on her shoulders. Yet it was this very burden that drove her forward, even in the darkest hours when hope seemed a distant memory. Ernest, his eyes still burning with the same passion that had once set crowds ablaze, now channeled his energy into strategy. His mind was a forge, constantly hammering out new ideas and refining old ones. In the quiet of night, he would pace their small, temporary lodgings, muttering to himself as he plotted their next move. The chessboard of revolution was vast and complex, but Ernest was determined to stay several steps ahead of their adversaries. Together, they wove a tapestry of resistance that spanned across lines of race, gender, and creed. In hidden classrooms and secret gatherings, they taught not just the theories of socialism, but the practical skills that would be needed when the time came to overthrow their oppressors. The lessons were a lifeline, giving purpose to those crushed under the boot of the oligarchy. The road was long and treacherous. There were nights when the weight of their mission threatened to crush them, when the shadows seemed to close in from all sides. In those moments, Ernest and Avis found strength in each other. A gentle touch, a knowing glance, a whispered word of encouragement. These small gestures became their armor against despair. They saw the fruits of their labor in the determined eyes of a young factory worker, eagerly absorbing their teachings. They felt it in the firm handshake of a farmer who had joined their cause. They heard it in the whispered thanks of a family they had helped to escape the clutches of the Iron Heel. These moments were like fireflies in the darkness, brief flashes of light that reminded them of why they fought. As another day dawned, Ernest and Avis prepared to move on, their meager belongings packed and ready. The constant motion was exhausting but necessary. Just as they were about to leave their temporary safe house, a frantic knock at the door froze them in their tracks. Hearts pounding, they exchanged a look of alarm. Had they been discovered? Was this the moment their carefully constructed world would come crashing down? The revolutionary work against the Iron Heel continued with unwavering determination. Ernest and Avis stood at the forefront of the struggle, their resolve stronger than ever before. But as they faced the unknown threat behind that door, they knew that every second could be the difference between victory and defeat in their relentless fight for freedom. The revolutionary work against the Iron Heel continued with unwavering determination. Ernest and Avis stood at the forefront of the struggle, their resolve stronger than ever before. In the shadows of a world gripped by oppression, they had woven a web of resistance that spanned the nation. Each cell in their network was a flickering flame of hope, growing brighter and hotter with each passing day. The air crackled with tension and possibility, as if the very atmosphere could sense the coming storm. On a moonless night, Ernest embarked on a daring mission to free their imprisoned comrades. The darkness seemed to swallow him whole as he disappeared into the belly of the beast. Avis paced restlessly in their hidden safe house, her heart pounding with each tick of the clock. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet, echoing the anxiety that gnawed at her insides. Hours stretched into an eternity until a frantic knock at the door shattered the silence. Avis's blood ran cold as she received the devastating news. Ernest had been captured. The words hit her like a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. Time became a blur as Avis threw herself into a frantic race against the Iron Heel's merciless justice system. She called in every favor, exhausted every resource, her desperation growing with each passing moment. But it was like trying to hold back a tidal wave with her bare hands. The system, cold and unyielding, bore down on them with crushing force. The trial, if it could be called that, was a mockery of justice. Ernest stood tall in the courtroom, defiant to the last, his eyes burning with the fire of revolution. As the sentence was read, Avis felt her world crumble around her. The execution was swift, brutal, final. The crack of the firing squad's rifles echoed in her ears long after the smoke had cleared. In the aftermath, Avis found herself adrift in an ocean of grief. The world seemed muted, colors dulled, as if Ernest's death had drained the life from everything around her. But like a phoenix rising from the ashes, she emerged stronger, more determined than ever. Ernest's memory became her guiding star, his passion for justice fueling her every action. As her belly swelled with new life, Avis redoubled her efforts. She gave birth in secret, cradling her child with one arm while penning revolutionary manifestos with the other. The baby, a living testament to Ernest's legacy, became a symbol of hope for the future they had dreamed of together. In those quiet moments, rocking her child to sleep, Avis would whisper stories of a world without oppression, painting vivid pictures of the society they were fighting to create. Avis threw herself into preserving the history of their struggle. Her pen flew across countless pages, recording every triumph, every setback, every dream of a better world. These manuscripts became her most precious possession, a time capsule of hope for generations yet unborn. The scratch of her pen on paper became a constant companion, a rhythmic reminder of the work still to be done. With the wisdom of hard-won experience, Avis became a mentor to the next wave of revolutionaries. She molded raw passion into disciplined resistance, sharing the hard-learned lessons of years on the front lines. In quiet rooms and hidden basements, she planted the seeds of future uprisings. The air in these clandestine meetings was thick with anticipation, charged with the electricity of shared purpose. As the Iron Heel's grip tightened, squeezing the life from society, Avis and her comrades prepared for the long game. They were no longer fighting just for themselves, but for a future they might never see. It was a burden that weighed heavily, yet gave them strength. Each small act of defiance, each whispered word of encouragement, became a brick in the foundation of a better world. The narrative of Avis's life ends abruptly, like a candle snuffed out in mid-flame. Whether she was captured, killed, or simply disappeared into the annals of history remains a mystery. But her legacy lived on, a spark that refused to die, passed from hand to hand, generation to generation. Centuries passed, empires rose and fell, and finally, like the first rays of dawn after a long, dark night, a new world emerged. The socialist utopia that Avis and Ernest had dreamed of became a reality, built on the foundation of sacrifice laid by countless unnamed heroes. Their vision, nurtured through generations of struggle, had finally blossomed into a just society. In this new world, children played freely in sun-drenched parks, their laughter a testament to the peace that had been won. Workers toiled not under the yoke of oppression, but in harmony with their fellow citizens, each contributing to the greater good. The air was clean, the water pure, and the bounty of the earth shared equally among all. As the sun set on this new era, casting a warm glow over the thriving communities, one could almost hear the whispered voices of Avis, Ernest, and all those who had fought and died for this dream. Their sacrifice had not been in vain. The world they had envisioned, a world of justice, equality, and freedom, had finally come to pass, a testament to the enduring power of hope and the indomitable human spirit.
This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.